Why don't you just say something like
Testing,
testing, 1,
testing,
2, 3.
testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Um, so where do we begin?
I don't know, Sarah. It seems like we've spent a lot of time together. Getting to know you has been a pleasure. And I have to say that I've learned a lot about my family from having you interview an aunt and uncle of mine.
What were some of the things that you learned?
I learned a lot about my great-great-grandparents. For instance, I never knew they had a brewery in Russia. That was really startling news to me. I also never knew that they were in the real estate business and had this big plot of ground, and that my grandfather was given this ground where he built the home for his family, and he built the house himself. I mean, these were all new things for me, and it was very interesting. I wish I could find out where the town of Osrian is. That's where they all came from, and we've never really been able to locate it. So this will give me a new impetus to look for it.
But you did try, right?
We did try at one time to find it when my mother, but we kept thinking that she wasn't pronouncing it correctly. But now after hearing Uncle Max say it, then I know that's what it really must be. So.
Is that you? Well, we also want to say that Bert is in the room,
Oh, yes.
watching his beautiful wife. So, I don't know, where do you want to begin? Because you were going to...
I don't know. You've been the interviewer. I'm going to let this all go on you.
Are you recording?
Well, you were... Yeah, we are, but you can do... Do you want me to just pause?
No, I'm going to say where we should begin.
Go ahead, where should we begin?
Lenny's family. Don't put it on me, please. Lenny's family were beacon from with one of the most beautiful families. The two brothers and their mother and father. And they had the whole family had a love affair.
That was
She's now left as the matriarch of that group.
Oh, you know I want to do one thing.
unsolicited testimony from my husband, who brought some insight into my family life. And I will have to agree, I was very fortunate. I have two wonderful brothers. They were older than me. They took good care of me. They really worshiped me. They were always so good, and they made me feel good about myself. We had mother and father who were completely devoted to their children and tried to raise us up with a good sense of right and wrong. And I think they did a good job in raising three children, and I would say that we all really had a very happy childhood. I mean, we did not have a lot of money or things, but I think we knew that we were important, and we had the warmth and comfort of knowing that.
So I guess there's a lot of things to talk about, but maybe since you just mentioned your brothers, maybe you can talk about Lenny's father and what you remember of him.
Well, Lenny's father was like one of my, I would say both of my brothers were like my best friends. Lenny's father was only 3 years older than I was, and he looked out for his little sister. Whenever I had a date, my mother would ask my brother Eddie, check him out. Is he okay? What's sister doing? They never called me B. They never called me Beatrice. They only called me sis or sister. Consequently, no one ever knew my real name. Even my mother got used to calling, hey sis, when she wanted something because she was so used to their saying it. Even my father would say, go ask sister. They never said, go ask me. So that was interesting in retrospect. I never thought about it when it was going on, but it was years later that I did think about it. Eddie's friends were always welcome in the house, and he had a lot of friends. He loved, when he was a teenager in high school, he loved to dance, and he won a lot of dancing contests. I got married and moved to Chicago, and I remember getting the letter from Eddie and said, I think I found the girl of my dreams, and she loves to dance. And we went dancing, and her name is Bernice, and she was working at Famous. Well, sure enough, I met her, and it was wonderful. I thought she was perfect for him. And it was very interesting, because after they were married about 10 years, I said, Eddie, when was the last time you went dancing? And he said, before we got married. But that was a very important criteria for getting a wife. He wanted someone who could dance. And Bernice and Eddie and Bert and I got along really well, and we had a lot of fun together when our kids were young and growing up, and we did really a lot together when they lived here in St. Louis. But I'm going to go back to the high school
Yeah.
time when we were early. Eddie was in the Navy during the time I was in the high school. It was when the war was, and we missed him a whole lot.
World War II?
World War II, right. He went into the Navy, and we missed him a lot. He wasn't in for a long time, but I remember when he came home in his Navy uniform. And I also remember when he was in the Navy, he did win a dancing contest. And I think the prize was a bottle of liquor. I'm not sure.
What kind of dancing was it?
Oh, ballroom dancing. Oh, he loved to dance. I mean, any kind of dancing that was popular at that time.
And did he get dressed up?
Oh, yeah.
Like
Oh,
what
yeah.
kind of
Well,
outfits?
Well, in the Navy, he wore his uniform. I'm gonna turn it on.
You want to get it? Go ahead.
Just a minute. Hello. Hi, how are you? Oh, yeah. How'd it go?
Gephardt asked us to come
Dick
go to
Gephardt.
the rally, you know.
Oh.
You know, you get all these calls.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back. We were talking about Eddie.
Yeah.
And we were talking about what he would wear, and he was really into dancing.
Yeah.
And what else?
Also,
him.
Eddie was really fashionable, very much into a fashion plate. Whatever was in style, Eddie had on. It was very important for him to be dressed just according. When blue suede shoes came out, that was it. And something that was really very humorous, when I met Bert, who was not a fashion plate, and he came over one time and he had this tweed pair of pants, some kind of corduroy something, and I don't even remember what kind of shoes. When he left, Eddie said, "Where did you find him?" And they were always commenting on his clothes until finally Bert did get the idea and tried to dress a little bit more in style as we sat. The other thing is, Eddie knew every girl in St. Louis. They all wanted to buy their shoes from Eddie. He was a shoe salesman to begin with, and they loved him. He had the patience, and he knew just what pair of shoes would go with what, and he'd bring them out, and that was it. And wherever I went, people would say, "Oh, is Eddie Lieberman your brother?" Like he was really a big celebrity, because that was very important to girls to get the right pair of shoes.
So where did he learn that fashion sense from?
Oh.
From his
I don't really know, but my mother was always into fashion. She used to make outfits for me. She loved fashions for herself. So we could, and my father was a tailor and he knew fashion, so I guess it was something innate. Shoes, I don't know. Where he learned shoes, I have no idea. But at that time, it was very stylish for all the young fellas after school on Monday night when the stores were open late. This is how they picked up extra money. They started out selling shoes on Monday nights and Saturdays. Very few of them kept it up as a profession, but Eddie got into the merchandising part, and he was a perfect fit for that.
Now, what was that time? What year?
I'm talking about 1942, 43, 44, 45, during that time. I started high school in 1941 and graduated in 45. So there's a 3 years difference, so you can put Eddie within that framework.
So, okay, let's go back further now, and we'll work our way up. So tell me about your grandparents.
Okay, we spent a lot of time with my grandparents. I, in particular, did spend a lot of time. My grandmother was very active in many organizations. One of her favorite organizations was Hachnosis Kala, and that means the joy of being a bride. The goal of this organization was to raise money and to get clothes for poor brides. It was to give them a dowry. And once a year, their big event was to have a mock wedding. Well, since I played the piano, I was the piano player for Here Comes the Bride, or else I was the flower girl. And my cousin Betty Ann, she was also one of the flower girls, and sometimes Taffy Dolores Toffel was a flower girl. So Baba would get everyone into this act. And from the time I was a little girl, I knew that this was a major project, a once-a-year event, and they would raise a lot of money by it. I also played the piano for her at some of her other organizations. They liked Jewish music, and I would play Ailey. Ailey was a favorite. Another organization that she worked hard for was, at that time, they had the Jewish Orphans Home. And another organization, she and my Zeta would make picnics out in the park for some rabbi in New York. It was called the Alika Society. And they would cook for a long time, and then they would have a picnic, and people would come and buy the food that they would make. Now, we all heard about her great kreplach that both Uncle Max and Aunt Helen talked about, but she made these kichels that were like a pull-apart kichel, and that was another thing people loved. So I would go on my bicycle. You can't believe that you could ride anywhere in the city on your bicycle in those days and not be afraid and go everywhere without a helmet, etc., etc. And I would go on my bicycle and try to buy some of the things that she needed at the grocery for her and bring them to her so she can do the baking. I do remember one other very important thing for my grandfather. Whenever they got solicitation for people who needed funds, they never turned anyone away. And he would save all these little pieces of paper that would come in the mail. And once a month he would say, Tochter, that's what he called me, daughter. It was like granddaughter, an endearing term. And I would come over there and he would have me write each one a check. He never turned anyone down. And even though it was a modest amount, sometimes there could be as many as 15 or 20 envelopes. And he kept track of every single one. He was meticulous, and he took time. He had to have a lot of patience. But we sent everyone some money every month. And
now, where did he get this
people,
money?
he was on a mailing list. They had mailing lists in those days. And one organization would tell another. They were from a lot of places in Russia, a lot of places in New York. And they just said, and they would write letters in Yiddish, and he would tell me that they're starving, or they don't have money, or they have a lot of children, or someone's getting married, they have to buy a wedding, you know, and they need help. And he would never turn anyone down, and he would always send money.
And this is the father was the carpenter. in
Right,
Glazer,
the
so
same one, and he was my Zeta. They're the only grandparents I knew. My other grandparents never came here from Russia. And they were all killed in the Hitler period. All of my father's family was killed then.
What's the last name?
Lieberman.
All of them.
Yeah, they were all killed. The only one who was really left is my cousin Elka, who they know because her mother, Aunt Machla, who was my father's sister, had escaped earlier. But the rest of the family was all killed.
How did your father get here?
The reason, though, this is an interesting story.
Does Lenny know the story?
I don't know if he does. When my father was 13, he ran away. He actually ran away from Russia. They lived near Pinsk or Minsk, one of those twin cities. And his father was extremely religious, fanatically religious. But my father kept saying, we've got to get out of here, we've got to get out of here, and no one would listen, so he just picked up one day and he got the money and he just left. He was only 13. His father came after him maybe a year or so later, and he saw that he was working on Shabbos, and he saw other things that he thought his son's not going to end up being Jewish, and he said, this is no life for you, I want you to come back.
Well, his father came after him to where?
To the United States. And he made him go back. So he went back and he worked and he saved his money again. And when he was 16 years old, he came here again. And then he stayed. After that, he knew when things got bad in Europe, and he knew that his family in Europe did not have very much money. He had an order at the post office here that every month $20 should be sent to this address in Europe. And it was sent, and when the Depression started here and things were bad, there were many months, my mother told me, that she needed that $20, but that $20 went overseas for his family,
For Nathan's.
for Nathan's family.
I'm just going to try something. Here, just pause.
It was interesting, and then in later years, Clarita even verified this whole thing. She had heard from her grandmother, who was my father's sister, Clarita Kaufman in New York, told us that she remembered her grandmother telling the stories that if it had not been for her Uncle Nathan, the family would have starved, and how every month they waited for his check and his money to come. And before a Jewish holiday, it was double the amount.
Do you know why he ran away, though? He
He ran away because he wanted freedom. He saw that they had pogroms. He saw the anti-Semitism. He told me stories that how kids would taunt all the Jewish kids and that you weren't free to walk. Why should he live in a country like that? He always told my brothers, you should kiss the ground you walk on in the United States. When my brothers were growing up and you'd start hearing things about politics and they would complain and they'd say, this one's a crooked politician or that one, he'd say, whatever you say, this country is the best country in the world. It might have its mistakes, but you should always kiss the ground that you walk on. He always preached that to the boys.
Are you okay?
Touched.
Oh, I know. But so he did. You think that Nathan was not interested in Judaism, or do you think that he was hearing from the other families that were leaving about America, and he just,
Okay.
or what? You know what I mean?
Okay. He was interested. He wanted to be Jewish, but he also wanted to be free. He did not believe in being fanatically Jewish, and this was a big thing. My father went through a period of years where he really was an atheist, where he was questioning. This was early on in his youth. Incidentally, I did not mention that he did come to this country and he ended up serving in World War I. He was in the Army in World War I. When he got out of the Army, and I remember when my brothers were getting to the teenage and there were talk about the draft or the Army, he said to my mother, I don't ever want them to feel that they can't eat non-kosher food. He said, when I was in the Army, because of my conditioning, I could not eat any meat and I practically starved. He said, I don't want you to do that to our sons. Let them eat whatever they want. He said, I'll never forget how much I wanted to eat and it wouldn't go down because of my conditioning. I think when my father first got married and the remembrance, he really felt that his family would have survived in the United States much better, and he carried a grudge a little bit against his Judaism, not his Judaism, but his father's fanaticism about making him return because he might not honor the Shabbat. And he blamed that kind of craziness on so many people dying. He said if he had not been so fanatically religious, they would have been able to come here and stay here and have a wonderful life.
But his parents and his brothers and sisters, they all died.
They all died, right, except he has the sister Machla did not die, and he had a brother Oscar who did come here, and he was here until he died. But I mean, he did not come here at the same time that my father. But he had other sisters. He had a sister who was supposed to have been just a beautiful girl, and he loved her, and he talked about her all the time. I don't even remember what her name is. Sherry Sue is named after my father's mother, Chaya Sar. That's it.
So he, you don't mind to talk? Or, okay.
And Bert is.
Bert. He, where did he go? Did he go to St. Louis right away?
He came, from what I know, he came directly to St. Louis. He
all
had
by
it
himself?
all by himself. All by himself with his two hands. He always used to say, my two hands are my trade. He said, they will bring me out of everything, his two hands. I have to say that in his early years here in St. Louis, he was a mover and shaker. For a young man, he came here. He immediately tried to get into real estate. He had a partner. They got into a dress factory. He did well for a number of years until the crash came. My feelings that he wanted not to be too involved in the Jewish community makes me think that's why they bought a house in South St. Louis, away from the Jewish community. Walter was raised in South St. Louis. His first 5 years he started in Booter School. There wasn't another Jewish family around there. My mother had a maid. She fed Walter every day with a silver spoon. Things were wonderful for them. They were very well off. My father was in the stock market. He had a flourishing dress factory. He was buying real estate, and boom, he had a lot of stock on margin, and when the crash came, he lost it. However, one thing he did, he always made good on all his debts, and if he owed anyone any money, he saw that he wanted to have a good name. He always said that the best thing a person can have is a good name. And he worked himself back, and he paid off everyone that he owed.
You're so wonderful. The light. Can we meet Tuesday morning?
Sure.
Okay. So we'll do a little bit more until. So he was 17 when he came back again.
About 16 or I think it was 16.
And do we know what year that was?
I'm trying to think. No, but I have to try to figure out when that was. Let's see.
In the 20s or the teens?
I think, let's see, when the war was in 1918. So I think it must have been like in about 1912 or something like that. 1914.
Was he a tall guy?
No,
a little guy?
he was short. He wasn't tall.
But not afraid.
No, not afraid. He had a lot of guts. And I know of the two of them, my mother was the one who was pushing the Jewish stuff more. But this was when he was young. As the older he got, the more religious he got when he was older. But he went through this period of really being non-religious and not pushing the kids.
So how did he meet your mother?
That I'm not sure. I think there's some story about something when they had their 50th wedding anniversary, which is how I'll be able to figure out the year. There was somebody said something on a boat. So maybe somebody knew that my mother was here, someone who knew her family, and someone who knew him. That's the only way that I could even think of it.
Do you know where he lived? Like, he came at 16 by himself. Who did he live with?
He lived with a family. I don't even remember who it is. I mean, he was a roomer. He had a room in a family's house. I mean, when I think about it, I'm amazed myself how he had the courage to do this. He got a job immediately. He was a tailor. He was able to get a job. He had a very high reputation for whatever he made. He made very fancy garments. There was a tailoring company here by the name of Losse Company, L-O-S-S-E, and they made suits, very expensive suits for the really high society people in St. Louis, and they would want my father to be the tailor. Bert.
Okay, hold on a second. So,
there's another part of my father I mean, he thought about his family all the time. I remember every time he got a letter, and he would read the letter about the family, and they would describe, I don't know who was writing these letters, and I mean, this is like when I was like 10 or 11 or 12, and he would just cry because whoever was writing these letters would tell how the situation there was very, very bad. The one person who probably has a lot of insight into this is Elka, Clarita's mother, because Clarita's mother escaped with her grandma, which was my father's sister, and they had no means of support. My father supported them. They eventually made it they left Poland and somehow made it through Portugal, and I don't know where exactly then they went to Israel. This was way before Israel was a state. They were just like pioneers. Elka met her first husband, Joseph, in Israel. He was an importer and exporter from South America, and he was coming to Israel on a buying trip because he also had orange groves in Israel. Now, Elka had no papers, and she wasn't a citizen of anywhere. And when it came time to marry him, it was very complicated. He brought her to the States when she was 17, and my father and mother went to New York to sign the papers for her. And she was the one who always told me in subsequent visits that if it wouldn't have been for Uncle Nathan, he really gave her a new life. She ended up marrying Joseph and moving to Bogota, Colombia, and that's where Clarita was born, and that's that branch of the family, which is why there's always such this close feeling, which I'm sure Sherry can tell you how she feels about Clarita and also Elka, because it was like my father saved this remnant of the family. That's what was left, and what he did for them, because he sent them money in Israel all the time, and he did not have a lot of money here. He worked very, very hard.
Do you know do you think his father was a tailor? How did he know how to do all that?
I don't know whether his father was a tailor, but a few years ago we did have some relatives in Sioux City, Iowa. I used to ask my father about his childhood, and he would not tell me anything. But I had a cousin there named Dave Levitsky, and he was here for a wedding. And I said, Dave, can you tell me anything about my father's childhood? And he was from there. He came over as a very young child. And he said, well, one thing I know, that your grandparents had a very beautiful home, and they had furniture that he used like plush velvet. He remembers the furniture in their drawing room is what he said. And he said on Sunday afternoon, people would come from all over to come and have tea there and to talk with your great-grandfather. I mean, my father never told me things like this. I did not know anything about that.
So did he speak to you about his parents and his
No,
family?
no, he never did. Only about his sister, that he wished could have been there, and what a beautiful life she could have had, she could have lived, etc. No, anything he spoke was why they didn't come and what they were missing out on. He did not. I have no idea what his father's profession was or not. I do know that my father was an avid reader. For when you consider that this is someone who never had a formal education and did not go to school. When I was in college, he was helping me with my thesis. If I had something to write, I would go to him. He would even dictate different things. He was a history buff. He was a self-read person. He spent all his extra time in the library. I have some of his favorite books, Shalom Ash, Mary. I mean, these were the kinds of books that he liked to read. He used to meet in the evenings with a man who was a philosopher. His name was Dr. Simon. And he would go to his house in the evening, and these men would sit around and discuss. He was just hungry for this type of intellectual stimulation. When we were young and we lived on Montclair yet, he would walk to Sher Emmeth on a Friday night just to hear Rabbi Julius Gordon give a sermon. And I mean, he didn't like going into the temple or anything like that, but he was so anxious for just some type of thought-provoking sermons.
Do you know if there was a certain part of history or something specific, or was just everything?
Everything. He knew all about American history. He remembered everything he read. Actually, he was well read from the Bible and from all kinds of Hebrew too, and that was, I think, what was forced literature on him when he was little, when they studied that, but he evidently retained it, and he appreciated it when he was older. But
and so he didn't go into synagogues when he was older?
Well, he eventually started going back, but it wasn't, until we started the kids started going to Hebrew school. He wasn't gung-ho, let's put it that way. I mean, if he did not have to go, he would not have to go. But my mother's parents were more on the religious side here.
But he wanted to marry a Jewish girl.
Oh, of course. I mean, he wasn't against being Jewish. Oh, no, he was all for the Jewish. He was against the fanatic word to say that you can't ride on Shabbos, is not the thing to do. He personally thought that if you have to earn a living and work on Saturday, you work on Saturday. And you just don't, follow the religion that closely. He was not for all those rules, but he was very proud of his being Jewish. They were two separate things for him.
Did he say that he believed in God and that kind of thing? Or?
He did, but he just did not feel that all these practices.
That was kind of a modern,
yeah,
forward
right,
thinker.
right.
Mm-hmm.
He did not think that these restrictions, let's put them that way, were necessary.
Okay, and so what about your mother?
Well,
Maybe we'll,
yeah. My mother was a good homemaker, and I think she was a very social person. She had a lot of friends. She liked to go to club meetings. When we were in high school, she was on the Mothers Club. She liked that kind of stuff. She came to all the PTA meetings and things like that. She loved to sew, and she made almost all my clothes. And when my brothers got married, she made tablecloths for both Bernice and tablecloths for Elaine. She embroidered them. I still have her quilts that she made for my boys' beds. And I still have her tablecloths. And I think Bernice told me recently she found a tablecloth that my mother made. She had never even used it. She liked doing needlework. And I thought she was a great mom. We were very close. My parents were very interested in seeing that all their kids had an education. That was an important thing, and that they all received some type of music education. Eddie started playing the violin when he was little. I can't tell you that he was good at it. You would get shivers down your spine. In fact, I used to go in the bathroom and close the door so I didn't have to listen to him when he practiced. Walter played the saxophone. In fact, it was the E-flat saxophone, E-flat alto. And I remember that one night the snow was so deep, and my father's car had this kind when it stopped and got stuck, you had to get out and crank it in the front. But he was determined to take Walter to a saxophone lesson. He should not miss this lesson. And the car got stuck, and I was in the back of the car, and he got out and started cranking it to get that car started. And the teacher was in South St. Louis, but he wasn't going to have Walter miss his saxophone lesson. And the same thing when it came for me with the piano. They really sacrificed so that I could take piano lessons and pay for the teacher and all that. So music was important to them. They loved knowing that we all had the opportunity to play music. And our house was always open to our friends. They wanted us to bring their friends to our house because they wanted to know who we were going around with. That was important. So they knew all of our friends very well. I mean, some of the friends hung more around our house than in their own house. So it was fun that way. I mean, and you felt comfortable. No one ever had to feel that they should not be there, or that someone was watching them or telling them what to do.
And okay, and so today, you know, we heard some. You were telling me some other things about your mother and her brother and sister. And can you tell me some of those things again? You said there was more to it than what they were saying, or they made you think of certain things that happened.
Well, the thing I thought of, they both said the families were very close. The thing that I thought of today was how our house was open. I remember on Saturday nights or Friday nights when Uncle Max's store was open late, and his daughter Taffy, that she was the only child, was Dolores. She would sleep at our house every Friday night. There was nothing too much to ask Aunt Esther if she couldn't stay at our house. When I was little, I'm rambling now, but I'm just thinking how Shirley Temple was my idol. I loved Shirley Temple, and I loved her movies. And on Saturday, my cousin Betty and I would go down to the Fox Theater with our lunch in a brown bag and sit there and watch the Shirley Temple movies. And then my mother would pick me up. And I was always crying after the show because some of her movies were so sad. And I'd come out, and each week my mother would say, "You're never going back to that show again. If you're going to cry, I'm not going to let you go." But sure enough, that she did. Now, one thing my mother never let me do was go to camp, because she heard all these wild stories of what kids go to camp. So I did feel I was deprived. All the other kids were going to Camp Hawthorne, and I never got to go. Also, they all went to Council House. My mother never let me hang out there. She didn't think the class of kids that went there were nice enough. So there was a little bit of censoring a lot of where we went and what we were doing.
Do you think that she was more strict than your friends' mothers?
Yes, I do think that she was. And this did bother me. I used to say, well, so-and-so's can go to there, why can't we go? And she says, well, let's so-and-so, if they're going to jump off the bridge, are you going to go jump off the bridge? That was the famous example that we used to have all the time. She was rather strict, but I guess when I look back at it, that it was probably the wise thing to do.
And what about your father?
My father was not quite as strict. She had to be strict for both of them. He was the easygoing. I could get anything I wanted from my father. Another highlight of my childhood was, this is not in sequential order, but as I'm thinking of it, was broken milk chocolate. On a good day, my father would come home from Mavracas, I guess was a candy place, and he would buy this broken, maybe this started my weight problem way back then, this broken milk chocolate. And he would bring home a bag, and to me that was like you gave me a pot of gold. Nothing could have been better than this broken milk chocolate he would walk in for all of us. And then you knew he had a pretty good day. That was a big treat. Also, we spent a lot of time going to Forest Park, etc. The next thing I do want to talk about, because I don't know if Lenny remembers any of this, but in the summers after we got married and we had children, all of us, Eddie, Bernice, and I, my mom used to make a picnic lunch on Wednesday nights, and we would go out to Heman Park, and everybody would come, and the kids would play ball, and we would make these picnics out at Heman Park, and Grandma Lieberman hamburger sandwiches and would bring a big basket of food out there. The other thing we did, which was really great, on all the holidays, we'd take turns at each one's house. Like Bernice and Eddie would have a barbecue at their house on the 4th of July, which was also Bernice's birthday, Grandpa Fred's birthday, and Grandma Lieberman's birthday, all around the 4th of July. And that was a big celebration, and we would always have a barbecue. Walter and Elaine would often have barbecues at their house, like on Memorial Day or Labor Day. So we try to get together on all the holidays like that, and that was great. That used to be fun, and the kids would play ball or do something else. And the kids all enjoyed each other's company. We had a lot of fun on the 50th, my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. We gave a nice brunch out at Meadowbrook, and I think they had a lot of pleasure out of that. And that was great. Really got things to say.
Okay, should we, yeah.
They were all killed.
Because
The way we heard that they died was, and this is from Elka, I don't even know if you want to put that. She said in that town, this is what she heard, and she was the one who had the last contact, that they came in and they shot everyone who lived in this town, and then they put tar over it, and they even saw these hands moving and stuff like that. And she said that's how that whole village ended up, that they were all killed. I mean, you know, so that I always think about that. I can almost, you know, just see the arms and legs moving under this hot tar. So you can imagine what he thought of. But I do remember when he'd get these letters and he'd pace the floor back and forth and cry, and he'd say, Esther, Esther, you know what's happening to them, and, you know, stuff like that. It was hard. I mean, they were far away, and you think you've got a family over there, and who knows what's happening to them. I mean, you know, he came.
He wanted to bring them here. He offered to bring
Yeah,
them here.
yeah, they wouldn't come because his father would say, if they came, they would not be observant because this country is going to make goyim. It's going to make them all forget their Jews. That's what his problem was. So for that, my father used to say, sometimes it's not worth being, you know, so religious. He was not an emphatic, you know, don't follow all the rules. He was not, he did not care that much.
Well, he cared more about living, it
Right.
sounds like.
Right. So that's, you know, what was more important to him.
And this was in Minsk or Pinsk?
Yeah.
You can't-
Yeah, we're not quite sure which it was, but they're border towns. And we went back 5 years ago, and I thought I would be able to find where they were, but we went with this Zvi Gittleman, who's a professor at University of Michigan, and he leads tours there, and he said, don't go because there's nothing to see. He says, it's a waste of time. He said, I've been to both Minsk and Pinsk. He said, you won't find anything there. So we were very close, and he talked us out of it, so we did not go. He says, I'm telling you, there is nothing there. So.
But sometimes it's good to just go.
Yeah,
just
well,
to
I don't know
go.
what I mean, we saw enough in these other cities.
Right,
so.
but just to be in the
Yeah,
general area.
right. Well, we were
that
pretty
was
close.
important.
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
pretty close. That was the purpose of our trip when
Right.
we originally planned it. This is not anymore, is it? Oh, sneaky St. Louis because of that. Yeah.
Big fair. very
Right. My
popular.
mother always talked about the World's Fair. What an event. The World's Fair was in St. Louis. That's when they built part of the Forest Park, which they loved to go to, the Highlands and things like that, because that was all built during the World's Fair.
And
So
that's
that was-
why you think maybe your father came?
Yeah, I think they read about it and heard about it, and
It was
this
a very
is,
popular thing all over the country. People were coming in
Yeah,
for jobs.
frickin-
I